Hi, I'm DJ Ware. On this episode of the CyberGizmo, I'm going to be taking a little bit of a look into the controversy that's been going on with BigSur and the possibility that it is sending your private information every time you launch an app. Right after this. So the problem occurred on Thursday, and I noticed this as well. I mean, I have a couple of old Macs. One is a Mac Pro 2013. Yes, it's a trash can Mac, and yes, it's quite old. But I was going to update it to BigSur because there's a couple of things that I wanted to play with in it that I can't under Catalina. So I went and tried to download the software, and it failed. It got it a little ways down, and it crapped out. So I got looking at it, and I noticed that the servers were really busy, and then I went over to Apple's website, and I noticed that the iMessage server was down, the payment server was down, the App Store was down. There was just all these outages, and they were all under investigation. So I said, oh, okay, so I went and I tried to launch some applications, and they wouldn't come up. They just stalled. Nothing was happening. And I plugged the network cable, and up they came. And I went, whoa, there's checking on something. And that led to an article by Jeffrey Paul. Jeffrey Paul is a security researcher out of Berlin, and he published this article about, hey, this is BigSur and Catalina with the update that came out at the end of October is now sending a request to Apple every single time that you launch an application. And he went through all of this, and he found that it was calling an OCSP server every time, and it was sending a unencrypted message with your date, the time, the computer that you're using, the ISP that you're on, the city, state, and the application hash every time that you launched an application. Well, that's kind of alarming, isn't it? I mean, in this day and age where we have people spying on us and tracking our data every 5 minutes, we're all kind of nervous about this kind of stuff. And when we see something happen, we immediately jump to, oh my God, here we go again. And he was also talking about that that request goes to a third-party CDN run by another company, Akamai. And, he goes on to talk about Prism. Well, first of all, let's talk about Prism. Prism is dead. It's been dead for a year at least, maybe 2 now. So Prism isn't the issue. But let's just go. Prism is long dead. The other thing is that he was able to control Apple's access to their OCSP server in the past by using Little Snitch and then just blocking it, right? Blocking any access to that server. Well, you can't now because inside the Apple you can't, because any firewall you have installed on the Apple, it makes a call that looks at the content filter exclusion list, and this OCSP call is now on that side. It's included in that content filter exclusion, which means it's going to send it no matter what you do. You can't stop it. So, and that's new with this patch in Catalina, and it's new in BigSur. So he goes on and he kind of speculates on, here's probably what they're doing with it. And, it raises quite a few alarms. And so I guess the first place to start here is I've been involved in PKI infrastructure. PKI is the public key infrastructure, which is used to generate and to validate certificates that are used by SSL. They can be used to validate our ISOs under Linux to see whether or not they have been modified. We use them to identify personal people to come into our particular system. I issue a certificate to them, and that as long as that certificate is valid, they're allowed to log in, for example. So, but let's talk about it. What is PKI? What does it do? How does it work? So let's just take it from the standpoint of a website that has an SSL cert. So when you make a call to that website with your HTTPS URL, there is a handshake that's going on in the background. First thing it's got to go to is the root authority. And the root authority is going to tell you, the root authority is the owner of all of the certificate authorities. So that's sort of the master. It is the one that identifies who can be a certificate authority. Now, what's a certificate authority? They're the ones that issue certificates. So the root authority says, okay, these people are authorized to be certificate authorities. Nobody else in the world is. You cannot become a certificate authority without first going through a very lengthy process to become approved by whoever the root authority is for your region. But once that is okayed, the root authority will then forward your request to the CA, and the CA will then say, okay, this looks like a valid certificate. The expiration date is in order, but I'm going to go check something called a validation authority, and that is where it actually performs an OCSP message to determine whether your certificate has been revoked. Now, a revoked certificate is it means that the certificate, as far as the expiration date, is still valid. But for whatever reason, maybe the business went under and now somebody has hijacked the certificate, or somebody's tapped into their network, and so they wanted to kill their certificates and get new ones. Because once you get somebody's private key, game over, right? And the PKI infrastructure uses two halves. So there's a private and a public key, just like any other two key encryption mechanism. But so the VA will then say, this hasn't been revoked, so we're all good here. Or it says, no, it's been revoked, and then that cert comes back as being, and then you'll get a pop-up in there that says, hey, your cert isn't valid for this site. This may be the site could be harboring malicious data or malicious programs. And so that is the way that it protects itself. The protocol that's used is Online Certificate Status Protocol, or OCSP. It is normal. If you turn on Wireshark and you watch how your browser goes through accessing sites, you will see a flood of OCSP messages. I mean, every time you go to a web page, there is an OCSP message that's fired off in order to validate that certificate. Now, there is a caching mechanism in OCSP because you don't always want to do it, but there is a means that they can, if whoever is the validating authority, they can turn that on to say, oh no, yeah, we know about this. This is fine. This is okay for now. And then later on, they'll recheck to make sure that the cert hasn't been invalidated sometime down the road. There are some problems with OCSP. I'm not gonna tell you there isn't. I mean, I remember this when the protocol was being defined. When PKI was being defined, the big issue was, and I remember this, it went on for months, that, hey, what if I want to revoke a certificate without it being expired? How do I do that? There wasn't any mechanism in the original standard to do that. And so this was developed after the fact in order to close that loophole. Well, OCSP in turn had problems because I could, if I had the key, I could man in the middle the call to the validation authority and become that validation authority and say, oh yeah, it's fine. And really it was a malicious attack. And there was a case a couple of years ago. I don't think they used OCSP to do it, but there was a case where some hackers actually got into the CA and managed to capture everything. And then basically they became the CA for that particular set of certs. And I think it was millions, actually, that were being used. So, yeah, that's a pretty big deal. And the other problem with OCSP is there's a thing called a replay attack so if it monitors one going off, you can actually reissue those same commands. There are some ways to mitigate that today, but there's still, OCSP is not perfect. It isn't perfect. But so what's going on here? What is this true? Is all this true? Well, there's another article that was done by Jakpo, and he's another security researcher. And rather than just accept, whenever you have someone that says, "Oh, there's a security issue," there usually is somebody or somebody else or a couple of people that will go in and validate the findings to say, "Yeah, we agree, this is a problem," or "No, this is not a problem." And so Jakpo actually went through and did an analysis of what was going on. So what actually is going on here? So he goes through and he explains the same thing I just explained about OCSP, and then he went in and actually started taking apart what Apple is actually doing. I was in the Apple development program, way back in the late 90s, somewhere around in there. We got involved in it, and I've been in it for a long time. I'm not active anymore, but I think it was like early 2000s. Steve Jobs was still in control of the company, and they actually started when the iPhone came out, and they started the App Store. They actually wanted developers to validate themselves by getting a certificate from Apple, so that if you supplied an application to be posted in the App Store, they could validate that you were who you said you were, and that this application could be presented by you for notarization. And that means that Apple puts it through some pretty stringent hoops in order to make sure that you've got the right controls in the application for security. You're not doing anything malicious or competitive with Apple, and there are some things in there about that. And that you're conforming to their guidelines for app development to make sure it's compatible with all their devices, right? So there is this process that you go through to get a certificate. You submit the certificate with the app when you submit it to the App Store. And Apple has been doing this part of it for a long time. They validate whether or not your application is notarized. I mean, Gatekeeper is the thing that does that. I've talked about Gatekeeper in the past. And Gatekeeper is the thing that determines whether or not your app is authentic. Now, they don't care about the app so much. They just want to make sure that the developer has gone through the notarization process. So what Jakpo found out here was that, in fact, all they were doing is sending a request using the developer's key to determine whether or not that developer's certificate had been revoked or not. And that goes through an OCSP server at Apple, because they're the CA for their keys on their App Store. So that's what the traffic is. Is it carrying a bunch of other information about the application? Not according to Jakpo. He says no, it's not. It's only carrying the certificate for the developer. And he even went through and brought up Firefox, and he saw the Mozilla developer key being fired, so he captured that. And there's some ways to do that. I'll leave these links in the show notes so that you can go look at this for yourself. And then he went over to Thunderbird and did the same thing and saw the same key, because it's Mozilla's development key. So they don't really have the information according to Jakpo, to actually track what application you're using. It's just the mechanism that they have been using since 2007 to validate whether or not the application is valid or not. And by the way, Linux guys, we do this on our ISO files too. And you should be doing this, but it's voluntary, right? I mean, you have to go do the legwork to go and see if whether or not the ISO is valid by running a SHA-SUM or a make or whatever, an MKE to make sure that it's fine. But that's the same purpose here, is to take a certificate and compare it against something to see whether or not it's valid or not. In this case, it's making sure that that user hasn't been revoked for some reason, and someone isn't then using their credentials to masquerade and get malware into the system. So that's what it's about. Am I defending Apple? Absolutely not. This whole mechanism about notarization of applications concerns me. It concerns me because I don't get to opt in as a user. I don't get a choice. This is my machine. I don't get a choice on what I do. And Gatekeeper will come up, it'll pop up, and you've seen this if you've ever used the Mac before. If you take an application that's downloaded outside of the normal App Store process for Apple, and you download it and you install it, you'll get a message that comes up, and that's from Gatekeeper that says, hey, I can't validate that this application doesn't contain malware. Do you want to authorize its use on your machine? or it may say that, I can't validate this at all, and that's it. It's done. So in that case, you used to have to go to the Finder and launch it. Now there's a different mechanism on BigSur to do that. But you can still get around that, but then that potentially places the burden of putting malware on your machine on you. Ultimately, that's where it belongs, right? I mean, that's my belief, and that Apple doesn't share that, of course, because they want to control everything. So do I agree with that? No, I don't agree with what Apple is doing here, but I don't need a nanny to help me manage my computer. Thank you very much. So the other thing about the workaround, should you use Pi-hole or just go into your Etsy host and change the IP address for Apple for ocsp.apple.com to localhost? Should I go into Little Snitch? Now, Little Snitch still works on Catalina, but it absolutely will not work on BigSur for the reason I just gave you. However, I will say this much. That's only true while you're inside the Mac and using a Mac firewall. Once that packet hits the network on the Ethernet cable, game over for them. You can do whatever the hell you want before it gets out on the internet. So if you want to stick a firewall on the front of it and say, you can't go there, you can do that. You can block that request. And there's nothing Apple can do about that, at least not yet. Yeah, and also, running VPNs inside of a machine, dumb idea. Should be at your network level, not inside the machine. That's just my opinion. But yeah, either it's on or it's not on. So yeah, is that a good idea? No, that's not a good idea. The whole purpose of an OCSP protocol is to validate if the certificate's been revoked or not. That protects you from malware as well as what they're doing. So it is not a good idea to block those. You should be allowing them. And yeah, that's just my opinion again. What to do about this? Well, first of all, I went out to some of the big names like Bruce Schneier and Krebs on security to look and see whether or not they have said anything. Now, as of yesterday, Krebs hadn't. I don't know. I haven't checked him today, but I'll look. And if I find something, I'll put it in a comment. But Bruce so far hasn't said anything. So, but there is something that we are doing, that the security guys are doing to counter this nonsense with our data. And you can go read about it. I'll put this in the show notes as well. It's called Solids. And Solids is being developed by a team led by Tim Berners-Lee, who, of course, was the author of what we know as the World Wide Web. But what Solids is a pod. It's a pod of your data. And you can wrap as much or as little in that pod as you choose to put in it. The other thing you can do is that entities that want access to your personal data, you can authorize for only a specific set of data and nothing more. So they can only have a subset of the data that's in the pod. You can also authorize IoT devices to have a smidgen of that data or none of it. And you can also authorize appliances to have access to that data or none of it. And so basically the pod you own, you control. And so that keeps your data from being spread out over how many sites? I was counting up the number of sites where I've given my name, address, city, state, zip, phone number, credit card information, and it's appallingly large. I need something that I can control, that I can use to parcel out data to those. But I don't want to reveal what that data is, but rather maybe a certificate that says, yeah, this is the data, and then have those other entities recognize what that is. Now, obviously, if I have something mailed at a house, I'm going to have to tell them what my address is. Otherwise, the shipper won't know where to send it. But I like the idea of controlling what information I disclose. The question I have is, how does it prevent the entity that you granted access to some of that data from using it to saving it? And I'm still looking at that, so I don't know exactly how all that's going to work just yet. So should you worry about this for the Mac side of things? Are they really spying on things? Are they doing things without your knowledge? I wish that we had more freedom in the way we could opt into these programs or not. Do I want Gatekeeper on? Is there a way to turn it off? No. No, there isn't. And that's the thing that I don't like about some of this stuff that's coming on. I mean, like I said, I don't need a nanny. I can do this myself. I don't need Apple to babysit. Now, maybe somebody else does, and that's great. Then opt into it. But by default, I should be allowed to opt in, not have to opt out or figure out a way to get around it, to circumvent it. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that, and that's why I run Linux. If any of you Mac users are listening to this and hear this, I mean, you're welcome over in our place. I mean, yeah, it's not the same as what you're used to on Mac, and maybe that's a good thing, given the fact of what Apple is doing. And they have been gradually doing more and more Microsoft stuff. I think they're trying to get to the point where they have control over your data completely, and they sell that access to that data in aggregate form to people that want it. So they want that revenue stream. Well, that's fine. Hey, what about me? That's my data. Where's my cut? Where's my percentage in this deal? That ain't there. They're just making this for free. So that's not fair. Anyway, that's the way I feel about it. Yeah, let me opt in or opt and not have to opt out. That's dumb. And then give me a mechanism to do that. What we really need here is a digital Bill of Rights. Apparently, our existing Bill of Rights in the U.S. don't mean anything anymore. But anyway, that's just the way it is. Anyway, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about vnstat. So I'm going to keep, so in summary with this article, I'm going to keep my eye on this and see kind of where it goes and what all the things that are going to happen with it are, and see if it is really a problem and we are identifying some things that maybe that Apple is collecting. I can tell you that the OCSP protocol does not have the mechanism to, well, I suppose it could. I mean, it doesn't really have a mechanism that is meant to track data. It's meant to track certs. So, yeah, I suppose you could abuse it. I don't know how the ITEF would feel about that. I mean, they're the ones that ultimately control these standards. I would think they would think that would be an abuse if that was being used to collect data in that manner. But, there are better ways to collect data on you. Well, I mean, why would I wait? I mean, first of all, if I'm only checking on the app when it comes up, how do I know how long it's been up and when you got off of it? I don't know where you went. I don't know what you did. I don't know when you got off of the app. It would seem to me it would be better to track it at the port level. I mean, when you opened up a port to Zoom, I can see that. I can see that you closed it. I can see the traffic you sent to Zoom. It might be encrypted, but I can see it. I know how much traffic you sent, and I know how much traffic you received. There's a lot I could gain from that. It seems like there's better ways to track data on me if they want to, versus having to go through these convoluted steps to use an OCSP server. But anyway, hopefully we have educated you a little bit on how PKI works. Anyway, let's talk about something else. Let's talk about vnstat. So what is it? vnstat, I think there's a man page for this. Let's take a look. Yeah, vnstat is two pieces. There's a console-based console traffic monitor, and then there's a back-end server that it does not collect data from the Ethernet or the wireless card directly. It uses the kernel to do that. So it's not going to collect data off your Ethernet card. It just says, hey, how many packets were sent and how large were they over the past period of minutes, and then it reports it back to you. So there is two parts to this. There's the front end part, this, and we can run a help on it. And then there's also, we'll come back to this. And then there's a back end that is it's creating a database. So the first time this comes up, it looks at your IP information and picks up your network address. So if you have wireless on, I'm sure it's going to be collecting data over that. And if you have an Ethernet cable plugged in, it's going to be collecting data off of that. Let's take a look at some of the data that it collects, though. Let's go back to the help here. So you see there's a couple of ways to do this, but what happens if I just put in vnstat by itself? So it just tells me for today I've collected half a gig of transmit data, about 9 gig, received data, and about 9 gig of transmitted data. There's a total of 10, and estimated what it thinks it'll be by the end of the day to be 20 if the range is there. So what does this tool really do for you? One of the things that you want to do if you're really concerned about security is you want to know what your patterns are with how often and where your peaks and valleys are in a typical day. Now, we don't always do the same things every day, but you probably have a pattern. You probably check your mail at a certain time. You probably go out to maybe you go out to the web and maybe watch YouTube, or maybe you go and watch Netflix. But there's certain things you do at certain times of the day. And this will help you, not somebody else. This data doesn't get outside of your system, but it'll help you establish what your typical pattern of frequency is for the internet. Now, where's that helpful? Well, if all of a sudden you were to come back one day and you saw vnstat reporting at 2 a.m. that there was a huge set of downloads that went on for 6 hours, you might be a little concerned that maybe somebody has gotten into your system. Or if you start seeing rapid changes to a bunch of files over the network, you're going to go, whoa, wait a minute. Now, it's going to take more information than vnstat's going to give you to do that. But let's just take one step at a time here. So let's do vnstat. Let's take a look at some of the stats. So we'll do it for the first 5 minutes. Oops. So in 5-minute intervals, it'll break down what all of my traffic look like in my network. If I want to do a breakdown by hour, well, I think, let's see, yeah, by hour, let's do that. And it'll show you for every hour what your breakdown of traffic looks like. So you get it? You're starting to see that, okay, so at 2000, I had 13 megabytes and 2 megabytes transmitted total, and then you see some peaks and valleys in here that are going on. If I want to see it for the day, I can do that. And then, of course, as this collects, I'll get more data. It will keep collecting in this database until it fills up your entire system. So there is a mechanism that you can purge the data out, and that's just by removing the card, telling vnstat to remove the network card, and that will clear the database. You can then add it back in again, restart the service, because the service is going to think it's gone, and it won't be collecting data until you restart it. Once you've done that, it's going to collect fresh data again and start all over from zero. So, or if you want to leave this on for a period of time, you can do that as well. Or you can just stop the service if you want to stop it collecting. But you can do that by day. You can do it by month. I think you can even do it by year. So it doesn't take up a whole lot of space. I was just kind of kidding about filling up your data. So yeah, if you want to establish kind of a pattern of usage, and you want to understand how your network is being used and when your busy periods are, maybe you're more interested in, hey, I think I need a 10 gig card, and then you find out, well, I don't really need one because my traffic doesn't really support it. I don't really need one or maybe I do need one from these times of the day because my network is just clogged for 2 hours and I can't get anything done. But it'll help you to make decisions like that. So that's all I had today. I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope you enjoyed this today. Yeah, am I concerned about the Apple thing? No. Am I going to keep an eyeball on it? Yeah. Do I trust Apple? No, absolutely not. One of the reasons why I dropped out of the developer program was I don't trust them. So anyway, that's why I'm over here on Linux, by the way. Hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and subscribe. Hope to see you all again real soon, and bye for now.